It's 5 after 12, so now that we're ready, we're probably going to get started. I'm Marcia Purdy, and I'm the secretary at the Women's Center here on campus, and I am also getting my undergraduate degree in Women's Studies and graduating in May. And I also am very privileged to be able to take a class this semester with Nikki, the Goddess of Spirituality class, which is a very incredible journey that we're on right now. So I am pleased to introduce Nikki Beadle-Frolick. She received an interdisciplinary PhD from Ohio State University in philosophy, religious studies, and folklore, where she specialized in women and religion, goddess spirituality, and ritual and performance studies. She's published articles on women in goddess religions, rituals of death, and sacred space. Her book, Coming to the Edge of the Circle, a Wiccan Initiation Ritual, will be published with Oxford University Press soon. Nikki has also been past president of the Midwest region of American Academy of Religion and currently serves as chair of the Ritual Studies section of the National AAR. She teaches courses at Iowa State University in both religious studies and women's studies. Nikki.
Oh, thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming out here. It's really fun to see some familiar faces and people from classes, so I haven't scared you all away or anything. And I hope if you're here taking classes in religious studies, you're getting extra credit from your prof for being here. If not, you should. So today we're going to start out with, actually with a nod to Larry Kirkwood's wonderful artistic work here. And when I was talking to Penny Rice, the director of the Women's Center, the Sloss House, and she was telling me about Larry Kirkwood and his project of taking normal people, I mean real people like you and me, and casting their body images and talking about beauty. We got to talking about some of the ancient representations of goddesses that you find in archaeological digs. And so she said, well, hey, do you want to give a talk this week? It's Women's Week, you know, we can maybe tie this in together. And I said, sure, why not, right? So we have a little presentation here, PowerPoint courtesy of my husband, who patiently scans everything for me. And I hope you can see it. Maybe we can turn down the lights a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit better. We start this discussion actually with a kind of a puzzle, or maybe a riddle. Most of the world's religious traditions, outside of the Abrahamic traditions, and if you don't know what that means, Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, conceptualize the sacred or the divine in both male and female terms, okay? In other words, there are goddesses as well as gods. And the question arises, well, what happened to the goddess in the Abrahamic traditions? Was there a goddess? Was there an idea of God as feminine? What's going on with that? And the answer to that question really has taken us on lots of different journeys. Now, some people have absolutely no problem talking about God as exclusively male, and that's it. God is he, God is father, God is king, God is male. What's your problem? Okay? Other people, theologians, most of them, whose thinking tends to be very sophisticated and involved, talk about God as being above all of our notions of gender. So God isn't male or female, God is above all of that. But then a funny thing happens to us. Whenever we use a feminine pronoun for God, if you don't think that's true, try it sometime, right? Just in casual conversation, whenever you're talking about God, slip in a she, or a her, or a mother, or something like that instead of a father, and chart your reaction, right? From some people you'll get like, giggles and, like a shrug. Oh, you crazy person, you must be taking some of those feminist courses at the university. What's wrong with you? Or other people actually get hostile, and get very, very upset and, and lecture you about, what are you doing? And then a few other people will just ignore it as, maybe some temporary lapse in your brain cells. So, we don't tend to think of God really in any way other than exclusively male. Although this really, historically, as historians of religion will tell you, is not the case within, say, the tradition of Christianity, which a lot of us are probably pretty familiar with. In Judaism and in Christianity, there have been moments in which God is described in very feminine terms. You have a nurturing God, you've got a sheltering and a comforting God, and so forth and so on. Things that we would, kind of normally ascribe to maybe a more feminine approach, a nurturing, maternal almost approach. There's one of my favorites is here, and God described as a mother hen, and which is a very evocative image, kind of, sheltering his chicks and making sure that they're all okay. By and large, though, we tend to think of God in male terms. And scholars of religion, like Carol Christ, have said that really this is problematic for women. She's a feminist theologian, a feminist scholar of religion. And she wrote a very famous article called Why Women Need the Goddess. And I use that article in my courses because it has some wonderful things in it from sociological, political, psychological perspectives that talk about the way in which women's life experiences are excluded from a lot of conversation that deals with the divine or the sacred, and that this is harmful for both women and men. Now, we could debate Carol's article, and I have done so in my classes, because she does have a small weakness in the way that she conceives of the concept of symbol. But I think she still has a point. Now, some of the ways in which feminists have reacted to her article, to her point, is to look at history and to look at text and to examine and to resuscitate and to revive those moments in which God seems to have a feminine face, in which God seems to be inclusive rather than exclusively male. Others have gone off in search of the goddess. Now, we kind of have a problem here in the States when we're looking for goddesses. Where do we look? Right? Where do we look? We tend to have a couple of places that we start. Goddess spirituality. And goddess spirituality actually is kind of an interesting phenomena because it goes into the Western Judeo-Christian religious traditions, as well as establishes a new religious movement, off in another direction. So it's a very interesting and involved and complex phenomena. One of the places that people look for goddesses, for feminine images of the divine, is to the ancient world. Okay, let's hope this works. Yes, ancient images of the goddess. See, that's good. I like it when these things work. Here's one of our first images. This maybe is a goddess that looks like me. I don't know. Well, before the Atkins South Beach time. This is the Venus of Willendorf, the Willendorf Venus goddess that was found in Austria, and archaeologists date this to about 25,000, 30,000 BCE, which is a fancy way of saying BCE. And so this is one of the images that you see popularized in goddess spirituality movements. And it's interesting here because it does a couple of different things that feminists tend to point to. One of them is that it captures what I might call non-Playboy images of women, right? This is not, obviously, no relation to Britney Spears, okay? This is a woman with very full breasts, pronounced buttocks, very large stomach. She may or may not, and a very pronounced vulva, right? Large thighs. She may or may not be pregnant. We don't know. Sometimes these figures are all lumped together as fertility goddesses, but I find that problematic and I find that suspect, actually, to simply lump all of these ancient figures together as a fertility goddess seems to diminish the many different roles that women have, and to kind of then restrict us to, yes, indeed, we are baby makers, okay, that's my goal in life. And so you've got definitely different things that are happening. One of them is, you know, looking at Larry Kirkwood's ideas of beauty here captured in, what are these, bronze, I guess, on the wall. You have non-standard ideas of beauty. Non-standard ideas of beauty. But the problem with these figures is that we really don't know what they were used for or what people were thinking when they made them. Okay, this is another one. This one is what's called the Earth Mother of La Salle. And she's discovered in a cave wall in France. Again, archaeologists think about 30,000 years BCE, give or take. Okay? Trying to date her. So here she is. Again, you have the large pendulous breast. You have, you know, the wide hips and thighs and stomach. You again have a visible and pronounced vulva. And here she's holding something in her hand that could be a crescent moon. That's how it's stylized a lot of times. But if you look at it, you kind of see that this tip up here is narrow, and that then it gets really wide down there. And to me, it looks more like a horn, or perhaps a cornucopia. You all know what a cornucopia is, right? We get them out at Thanksgiving and fill them with neat, dried leaves and stuff and put them in our centerpieces for Thanksgiving. The horn is plenty, right? This idea of bounty and plenty. So she maybe she does have something to do with fertility. We're not really sure, okay? Or some kind of plenty. It's probably not, however, going to be human fertility that she's most concerned with. It's probably going to be fertility of the food source, which makes a whole lot of sense if you think of it. I mean, people are always kind of concerned about finding adequate amounts of food to feed themselves and their children, right? And so perhaps she is concerned in some respects with fertility. Another one that's a very cool image is the snake goddess. A lot of times she's called the snake goddess of Crete. And she was discovered, a figure that was discovered maybe to be about 1600 BCE. And here, she's definitely a stylized figure, but she's topless and she's got prominently displayed boobs, right, breasts, and she's holding in her hand 2 snakes. And she seems to have something perched on her head, on top of the headdress, maybe a bird or something like that. This is a figure that's been interpreted in a bunch of different ways. The snake goddess of Crete. This figure has recently been discovered, and the question is whether this one is the most ancient one of all. Now you can see just how big the figure actually is. It's pretty small, right? It's no bigger than the guy's hand who's holding it. And this one is called the Apulian goddess. It was discovered in the Golan Heights. Okay? And some archaeologists have pointed out that this could be as old as 232,000 to 800,000 BCE, which is like off the charts as far as I know. That's like, what is that, the oldest thing we can think of? You know, I'm not too sure about the veracity of that scholarship yet. I mean, I think a lot of stuff is still shaken out with respect to this figure. But already, and what's kind of interesting to me is that each one of these figures that I showed you has become actually part of some aspect of popular culture or religion for goddess spirituality and feminist spirituality, either stylized on t-shirts and jewelry and so forth. You can buy an image of this. You can buy a reproduction of this now. You can actually buy a necklace that's made out of that, and you would probably have your friends asking you what that is, because it's not even really clear that it's kind of human. You sort of think it's human, but what are these figures really? Are they goddesses? We don't know. They could be anything. There's a very funny thing. You know, you get those, everybody who's plugged into email, you get these things on email from your friends, don't you? These jokes and things that people send you that seem to have made it around the world 50 or so times. And one time I got this from one of my students, one of my former students, sends me a fake archaeological story that's set 5,000 years into our future when they dig up Barbie dolls. And they have decided that people during our time worship the cult of Barbie. Oh, it's really cute. I mean, it's very cute. You know, Barbie, you know, Malibu Barbie, the sun goddess, right? And her two eunuch consorts, Ken and G.I. Joe, who would contest, you know, for her hand in something, I don't know, yeah, whatever. Anyway, who would contest for her every year, kind of like the Holly King and the Ivy King. And if you know mythology, you know, that was really kind of a cute move. And they talked about all of the accessories and stuff and the mantra that the little priestesses would chant, I want, which would happen around the winter solstice, Christmas. Right? And it was adorable. It just went on and on that way. But, you know, the point was well taken. You know, it's good to have a kind of healthy skepticism and, you know, kind of wonder, okay, what is this really? What is it really? What are we looking at here? Don't automatically assume that it's one thing or another. However, be aware that right now it's serving a purpose. It's serving a purpose as part of a religious narrative. And that is something to take very seriously. Where else might we look for goddesses? Well, we might go to the goddesses of antiquity that we're probably a little bit more familiar with, especially if we watch shows like Hercules and Xena. You know, one of my favorites before they took it off. I was so disappointed when they took off Xena, warrior princess. Anyway, here you have Diana of Ephesus, right? She's a statue that was built in Rome. This statue dates maybe from around the 1st century BCE. Now sometimes she's called Diana of the many breasts, right? And these little things here are all understood to be breasts that she's nurturing and feeding everything in the world, right? So she's Diana, the many-breasted mother. I read another interpretation of her recently that was, I thought, really surprising, because I would never in a million years have looked at that statue and thought this, that these were actually testicles that were left to her in sacrifice, you know, by eunuch priest or something like that. And I thought, wow, I would never in a million years have looked at that statue and thought, oh yes, of course, Diana of the many testicles, you know, left there by sacrifice. So that was a kind of an interesting interpretation, but it caught me short because, you know, even I, although I look at things with a very, you know, kind of questioning and critical eye, here's an interpretation I would never have thought of, right? But we have to be kind of careful. Here's Hecate. Hecate's another one that's kind of interesting. This is actually Hecate. It has a lot of different representations. Here's one. I think this one came from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's a reproduction of an actual shrine statue. Had to be the three faces, right? There's a lot of triple-faced or triple-aspected goddess images. And sometimes these triple-aspected goddess images are, interpreted as maiden, mother, and crone. Well, that's not necessarily the case. In some of the goddess traditions that we know about that have come about in an age where there was written language that we could decipher, we find that they don't necessarily have anything to do with stages of life or phases of the moon or anything like that. The maiden, mother, crone thing seems to be a modern day interpretation or reading that's kind of projected or placed on the Greek goddesses. But what's one of the problems with the Greek goddesses? You guys in my goddess spirituality class, I'm looking at you. What's one of the problems with these Greek goddesses? Don't rush to the front. Okay, Marcia, brave person.
Well, one of the things is they start out being something and then they kind of turn into something else, or are seen doing something else.
Okay, like what?
Well, some of them start out being earth goddesses or mother goddesses and supposedly loving and nurturing or whatever, and then, or they start out being the other way around. They start out being, killing and fighting and very brave and very strong, and then all of a sudden, it progresses to, now they're loving and caring and nurturing, and they're linked to mother, and then mother is inevitably linked to nurturing and that sort of thing. So
there is a distinct problem with that. Sometimes, and this is true, there's change. Okay, there's always change, guys. There's always change. Now there's change all the time. But there's definitely change in the way that goddesses are perceived. And we know this through looking at the written records and looking at the way the worship changed and that kind of stuff. Sometimes they turn out to be goddesses of war, and they're very active and very fierce and determined and independent. Think Durga. Guys, remember in class Durga? And then they become domesticated. All of a sudden, they show up with a husband and kids. And it's like, what happened here? Where's the old goddess of war, right? Occasionally, you can't really be, say that they're sort of feminist eruptions of deity, because if you look at Athena, you know anything about Athena? Athena, goddess of war, sprang full blown from her father Zeus's head, right? That's kind of odd, Oh, well, yeah, Zeus basically ate her mother, and because he was afraid that, the child that she was bearing would outshine him and stuff, so he ate her mother, and he gave birth to the child. Anyway, that's sort of how the story goes. And one feminist reading of all of that is talking about how the birth process was appropriated by a patriarchal god. Instead of the goddess giving birth, which you would kind of assume would be sort of a natural way to go, the god gave birth, and so the god stole the birthing ability from goddess. And here you've got a patriarchal goddess born from the forehead, from the head of a patriarchal god, and a way in which to assert a relatively patriarchal system over people. That actually gives us a very good caution, because we cannot assume that wherever in the world we find goddesses, that must be feminist heaven for women. It's not. Goddesses, images of goddesses, are frequently used to keep women in their place and to solidify social roles as much as they're used to empower women. Here's another goddess of the ancient world. This is an Aztec goddess from Mexico, whose name I always mispronounce. Tlazolteotl. I would never attempt to call this goddess in a circle, especially if I couldn't pronounce her name. But she's definitely kind of a fierce-looking goddess, obviously giving birth. Or maybe just grimacing while giving birth. Some of these images, I'm showing you the ancient images of the goddess because in a few moments I'll be showing you modernized images of the same goddesses, and some of them very much change they get makeovers. They get makeovers, that's one way to put it. They change in the translation. Now there are other traditions that we could borrow from if we wanted to find goddesses. If we were looking around the world for goddesses, we could go to India. India, Hinduism, has many, countless goddesses. All of them being worshipped right now. And we could go to India and we could say, buy a statue of Kali. Kali. Now, it's a little bit dicey to do this though too, right? Because here we are. I'm not from Iowa, but I'm close. I'm from Ohio, another state with 4 letters and lots of vowels. Okay? So here we are, good Iowanians. That's how we pronounce it back there. Ha. It's 1 syllable. Ha. Okay. Want to make sure you guys got that. I'm on tape, right? Saying this for all posterity. Good. This is Kali. Now we might have a little bit of trouble with Kali because she's scary looking. She's scary looking. If you liked Xena like I liked Xena and you used to watch her, think Xena on an especially bad hair day. All right? Really badly. She's got a necklace there. I don't know if you can make them out. Those are little skulls. She's got a necklace of heads. It's an arresting piece of jewelry. A necklace of heads. And if this were a poster of her with her many arms would be holding weapons. And one of her hands would be holding the severed head of the monster guy that she just, decapitated. Right? Now she's kind of a scary figure. And the reason that she sticks out her tongue, her bright red tongue like that, and the reason that it's bright red, is because her story is, and think Zeus and Athena here for a moment, her story is that there was this really nasty bad guy demon who was defeating everybody. And even Durga, the goddess Durga, couldn't defeat this demon on her own, this bad guy. So she calls forth Kali from her forehead. And Kali springs into action, right? Ready to go. Ready to get the bad guy. And this bad guy was really nasty because every time somebody cut it and it bled a drop of blood, it would grow another monster. That's bad. Bad news. Right? It's like that Hydra thing, where the many-headed Hydra, you knock off one head and 2 more grow in place, Wow, where's the end of that? So Kali comes out and she's a whirling dervish kind of goddess, and she's ready at the mark, and she licks up all the blood. All gone. No more blood, no more monsters. Poof. But there was a little bit of problem because she kind of got carried away. She was just ready to unleash destruction on the entire planet. And the story goes that, one of the stories is that Shiva, god of war kind of figure, goes out and lays down in front of her on the battlefield. And the story that, interestingly enough, gets expunged from some feminist text of the story, feminist tellings of the story, is that Shiva has an enormous penis, an enormous erection, that Kali becomes infatuated with. I suppose, why not? And Marcia, why not, okay. Becomes, kind of like takes her attention, and she goes, oh. And so Shiva and Kali go off, kind of dancing off into the universe, and the universe is saved from total destruction. Curiously enough, I was astounded when I saw this, because one of the aspects of goddess spirituality is reclaiming women's sexuality, or sexuality, period. But in Sage Woman magazine, there was a story where Shiva became a little tiny baby that went out on the battlefield. He turned himself into a little tiny baby. And his little legs were kicking and his arms were moving. And then Kali went, oh. went over and picked up the little baby and stopped destroying the world. I'm like, okay. I like the original story a lot better. That was a lot more fun. But curious, it's very curious the way that these cultural stories are used and changed by people today, right? So we're not quite sure sometimes what to do with goddesses like Kali. Kali is also a kind of a, because she is such a kind of like a scary, sort of a scary, intimidating, heavy-duty goddess. She's one of the last goddesses that Hindus themselves would bring over to the West and set up an installation of in their temples here in America. And in fact, I had a student, a Hindu student, in one of my world religion classes, and we were talking about new religious movements and feminist spirituality, goddess spirituality, and mentioned that American women were calling Kali into their circles, invoking Kali. And that just blew him away. He's like, how in the world, why would they do that? Don't they know what they're doing? You know, I mean, would never do this. And he just sat in the class, he just sat during the rest of the class, and you could tell he was working on this problem. It was a real heavy thing for him. Finally, at the end of the class, he comes up to me and he says, well, I've given it a lot of thought. And I suppose that if Kali wants to come to America, then Kali will come to America. And that's that. And that really, I kind of like, it's one of those moments, one of those rare moments when I'm totally speechless. And I think my mouth dropped open even, and I'm like, here was something that I hadn't thought of. He was according the goddess agency. Agency means that she can do things on her own, right? She's not just an image or a metaphor or something like that we can manipulate. She made the decision. I want to come to America, and golly, if they're not going to take me, I'm going to get there another way. And so I imagined all of these feminists around the country, California and wherever, invoking Kali, and she'd be very happy that she's come to America to see new sights, right? Maybe even Iowa. Maybe Kali's invoked in Iowa, I don't know. So Kali gets around. You got to remember, these goddesses have their own agency. Here's another ancient goddess, right? This is another Indian goddess, Adya Shakti from India. This particular statue is about 1000 CE. And here's one that's a little closer to home than India. This is actually Pele. You guys know who Pele is? Who's Pele? Okay, who's Pele? Yeah, Hawaiian goddess of the volcanoes, right? Goddess of the volcanoes. I was told that if you go to Hawaii, don't try to bring back any sand or nothing, okay? No lava, that kind of thing, because Pele gets mad at you if you do that. I'm willing to take it seriously.
People send back rocks all the time from Hawaii.
Do they?
Yes.
Is Pele always mad?
I asked somebody to bring back something that was Hawaiian, and when she came back, she said, my sister told me not to do it, that we would have a lot of trouble. It's not good.
So she refused, huh?
Well, she was trying to look out for me.
Oh, good.
But they have a lot of people, the post office receives lots of rocks.
Wow. That's wild. So Pele is like permanently mad. No wonder the volcanoes are erupting over there, huh? Maybe we should rethink that. Well, that's a very old image of Pele. This particular version of this image goes back to the early 19th century. Now, one of the most primal and most basic inspirations for goddess is the earth itself. Here we've got two hills together. These are called the paps, those mean breast, right? Breast of Anu, right? And this is in County Kerry, Ireland. The paps of Anu. So people looked at that and saw two breasts, right? That's kind of neat. I like that. This is actually a modern creation. This is not natural. This was from 1977. And this is called Woman Living Earth. It's by Clara Meneres, who's from Portugal. And actually, I'm not quite certain, but I think Clara Meneres was a student or a resident or something like that at the University of Iowa. So there's some kind of an Iowa connection with her. But this is her creation there. This is another very old one. This is a Neolithic cave site in India. Here's a modern day, with the artist, modern day depiction, vulva, right? There's the vulva. There's the artist up there. There's the face of the woman's face in the rock. Can you see that? Yeah? Can you see that okay? This is called She Who Opens the Doors of the Earth, and it's by Vijay Hamilton, Mexico, 1982. 1982. Now actually this is really an Iowa connection. This is the Tree of Life series by Ana Mendieta, Iowa City, 1977. This is where that was done. So the earth itself, caves, hillsides, the topography of the land has been evocative for people of both male and female images of the sacred. One of the ways that goddesses are brought into the modern day is by taking old images and making them new again. If you remember the Willendorf Venus, right? That's a person. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's called Earth Mother on the Day After the Nuclear Holocaust by Susan Mayberry of around the year 1985. And so she's done herself up like the Venus of Willendorf figure, to stand there in the rubble after the nuclear holocaust, right? The Earth Mother of La Salle, right, 30,000 BCE, give or take. This is something called the Ruprestrian series, again by Ana Mendieta, Cuba, 1981. This is when she returned to Cuba. And what she would do, I read about the process that she used for making one of these. This is in earth and rock. She would use her own body as a template. She'd lie down, and she would have an outline made, and then she would have some kind of like a stuff that you could light, that it would burn into the soil and rock, and then she would start the chiseling process, right, and kind of start making the drawing take on a more three-dimensional form. And she's got, she's holding something in her hand, in a similar pose, right, to the Venus there, the Earth Mother Venus. Diana, remember her, of the many breasts? This is one of my favorites. This is just adorable. This is cute. This is Louise Bourgeois as Diana of Ephesus, and she's a New York performance artist, right? She does a lot of stuff like this, and so this is her suit that she made. She got into with the many breasts and so forth. And she's just amazing. Here we had our snake goddess, right, around 1600 BCE, and this is a painting called Charmed by Margot Makito, 1984, with the snakes, kind of flowing around. Here's another snake goddess. Snake goddess is kind of popular. This one is by Deborah Sherwood, 1981. Remember Aja Shakti, right? Very, very much feminine. We don't know if this is a statement of sexuality, sexual power. Is it a fertility image? Can we have fertility and sexuality split from one another without putting the two of them together in our minds? What about when we look at
Judy Chicago, right? Judy Chicago, pretty famous. Judy Chicago, this is something called the crowning. Very, very similar pose, right? Interestingly enough, these kinds of poses with the legs spread wide and the vulva wide open and so forth, sometimes they're called, I don't have a really good picture of one, unfortunately, sometimes they're called Sheila Nagigs, S-H-E-E-L-A, or sometimes Sheila, like the name Sheila, N-A, and then dash G-I-G-S. And these Sheila Nagigs are found carved into the wooden beams of churches in Britain. Right? What in the world are they doing there? All of a sudden you're in this old church, you're on tour in Britain, and you look up and there's a Sheila Nagig staring down at you. Okay, that's kind of arresting. But the idea for this was that these artisans a lot of times were, coming from maybe a different worldview or outlook or possibly religion. They were being paid to do the decoration and stuff, and of course it was totally appropriate that a Sheila Nagig, image of a goddess, would go up there to bless the entire congregation. Yeah. Okay. Judy Chicago. The unpronounceable name of the goddess from Mexico, the Aztec goddess. Birth Mother by Deborah Kruger, 1985. Hecate, remember Hecate? Yeah? Here's another Hecate. This is very stylized, right? By Sudhi Rakushan, 1984. Pele. Pele gets redone lots of different ways. This is Pele in a slightly more romanticized version, right? This is by Susan Sedon-Boulay, whom I love her work. She does all kinds of, she's passed away now. She had breast cancer and died a few years ago. But she has all kinds of calendars and that kind of thing with goddess images and shamans and all, animals and that kind of thing. And you see her blending often of different anthropomorphic figures with animal figures and things from the natural world in the background. They're usually very, very beautiful. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's Malibu Pele. What do you think? Volcanoes in the background, kind of like the Malibu Barbie Pele? No? It's actually called The Realm of the Fire Queen, and it's by Barrington Colby, 1989. So you see, we've got everything from the oldest lump of something that you can hold in your hand and say, this looks like a human form. That's an ancient goddess. We can use these images to empower us to something like Malibu Pele, who is very romanticized, very stylized, and very much in the, within the tradition of our expected forms of beauty today. All of these things are just wonderful grounds of contestation and negotiation as people use and get inspired by and formulate and interpret and reinterpret these images of the sacred that, as Carol Christ would argue, women need today. And actually she would probably agree that men need them as well for balance. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation, and I'd like to open it up for questions or discussion or comments. Yeah?
I have several questions if you don't mind answering.
Well, I'll try to answer them, yeah.
The first question is why does the Venus of Willendorf not have a face? And what is it that's supposedly on her head, or instead of her face?
The Venus of Willendorf has this what appears to be a headdress. And people have interpreted that. Remember, there are all these very, very different interpretations about what these statues are. Some people have interpreted that as like cornrows, like braiding, or like a headdress or a hairstyle. Other people, and these are textile people, have said that this was the first evidence of weaving. Now, I know absolutely nothing about textiles. except, you know, like what I buy in clothing. So I'm willing to accept that that's a possibility, I don't know, but that this kind of method of putting together, you know, this patterning is reminiscent of very, very ancient pieces of cloth that they have. So that's quite possible. Why was her face not given? Faces were apparently not given in a lot of these early statues. It wasn't like the Greeks. The Greeks were real particular about faces in their statues, and you know, they even tried to have like this, what's become for us the classic forms of beauty with the muscles and the proportions and that kind of thing. And some of this stuff is definitely not about that at all. And so the emphasis, people think, must have been more on the body of the goddess for some reason, or the body of the figurine. So, I
And I
don't
was
know.
going to ask, with respect to the snake,
Yeah,
the second one,
Yeah.
the third one you showed,
the snake eyes.
she did not look very happy, and she did not look like nurturing or fertility. What kind of function do the snakes?
Good
Sure.
question. Snakes are wildly interpreted by different groups of people. Some people see snake and see bad things. You know, the snake in the Garden of Eden or something like that. You know, they see, and they're scary. Snakes are somehow scary. Other people look at the snakes and see representations of sexuality. Freudian-based analysts are likely to look at snakes in iconography and in statues and see sexuality somehow represented. Other people say that the snake represents the transformation and the healing and rejuvenating powers of goddess, because the snake sheds its skin and can transform into something else. So